I'm Veena P, pursuing computer science engineering from MSRD. Welcome to the video seminar on version control with Mercurial SCM. So, this is a technical seminar on the concept of version control and its tools. The agenda for the video seminar would be a brief introduction to the concept of version control. We'll walk through the steps on the installation of Tortoise Hg, a graphical tool that sits on top of Mercurial, and the demonstration of the tool in an example scenario. So let's get started. As our second task of our agenda, let's have a quick introduction to what is version control. Mercurial SCM provides cross-platform support through command line interface on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and also provides standalone GUIs which are named Tortoise Hg on Windows, Merky on Mac, and HGK on Linux. So, what is distributed revision control or distributed version control system? It is a system that keeps track of the software revisions and allows many developers to work on a given project independent of the network access or a central server. Here, with the help of distributed revision control, committing, branching, and merging are very fast. So, why do we need revision control and why Mercurial alone? Revision control is the process of managing multiple versions of a piece of information. Manually managing multiple versions of even a single file is an error-prone task. So, software tools to help automate this process have long been available. So, we have heard different names. We have heard names like revision control, source control management. Revision control are also called by various names like source code management, source code control, and even version control. So, in order to explain the two types, that is the centralized and the distributed, let's have a look at the quick video, which is very interesting and very self-explanatory. So now it would be a bit clear why distributed version control takes the upper hand over centralized version control system. So let's go forward with distributed version control in our 21st century. So we have many projects that follow distributed architecture. A few to name are Git and Bazaar and our Mercurial SCM, and those that follow centralized architecture are Subversion and SVS. So let's know what are the various characteristics of Mercurial SCM. It is a distributed architecture, so it gives each developer a local copy of the entire development history. This way, it works independent of network access or a central server, and it's fast. Mercurial's implementation and data structures are designed to be fast. It's platform independent. Mercurial was written with platform independence in mind. Therefore, most of Mercurial is written in Python with a small part in Portable C for performance reasons. And it's extensible. The functionality of Mercurial can be increased with extensions. Easy to use. Mercurial sports a consistent command set in which most subversions users feel right at home. Potentially dangerous actions are available via extensions you need to enable. So the basic interface is easy to use, easy to learn, and hard to break. And most importantly, it's open source. Mercurial is free software licensed under the terms of the GNU General Public License version 2. So having said the characteristics of Mercurial SCM, let's go forward. So this is a typical scenario of a distributed version control system. As part of our third task in the agenda, we will see a similar scenario through the demonstration. Here we have the Alice and Bob are the users, and the developer tries to commit and update his working directory, and through push and pull get, he gets access to the build server. So why use revision control? It will track the history and evolution of your project, easier to collaborate, to recover from mistakes. Creating new changes and branches are much simpler. Transferring the changes around are easy. History and status operations are all fast. It's the extension of the previous diagram. So let's have a look at the Mercurial concepts. Tortoise Hg is a set of graphical tools and a shell extension for the Mercurial distributed revision control system. It's primarily written in Python and PyQt. So users code that Mercurial conceptual model is clean and simple enough to carry around in our head. So we need to know three terms before we start up with the demonstration. They are the repository, chain set, and working directory. So what's a repository? Each person works in its own repository. It's a directory containing the history of the project. We can make a copy, also known as the clone of a repository here. A working copy are the files you are currently editing. What's a change set? A snapshot of the project at any point in time is called a change set. We can point out who's the committer, can obtain a readable description of the change, can figure out the files which were changed, and the parent change set. Creating a change set is also called Hg commit. So, what's a working directory? Any file in the working directory, all the files we are editing are present in the working directory. So, let's look at a typical scenario of a version control definition. From the working copy that is hosted locally on commit, we transfer to the remote repository. On Hg push, it is hosted on the remote repository. And whenever the developer wants to access the contents of the remote repository, he has to initiate Hg pull to acquire the changes from the remote repository. And on Hg update, our working copy will be updated. This is a scenario where a single developer that works from multiple locations. He uses his desktop and laptop. At the same time, he can have a synchronized version of the copy from the remote repository. Using Mercurial SCM, sharing is symmetric. I can clone a remote repository to get a local copy of it. I pull new changes from a remote repository. I push my changes to another repository. After a push, the remote repository is identical to mine. Now, as our next step of agenda, let's see how to install Tortoise Hg Mercurial client on Windows for your version control. Now, I'll be using the Tortoise Hg client. That's a graphical tool that sits on top of Mercurial and that provides a nice interface that you can use to work with it. Mercurial itself works through a command line, which is very helpful for your build process, but not so great for a video and for learning about it. So, in order to install Mercurium for the version control system, just first off open your favorite web browser, which is Google Chrome in my case, then do a Google search for Mercurial SCM. Easy to find. The first link is our destined link. This is the homepage of Mercurial, which says Mercurial is a free distributed source control management tool. We can find the downloads for Mac and Windows. Click on download now. Find the destination. So download started in the left hand corner of your web browser as it brings it down on your computer. So let's wait for a moment until the download completes. So once the download is complete, allow it to run. As it runs through the setup wizard, thankfully you need not make any changes. We can keep the defaults as it is and click on setup. Allow the user account control. Then go ahead and click finish. Once you're done the install, you can check to make sure that it worked by right clicking, and we can see the HG workbench, Tortoise Hg, with a whole submenu of various options available through Tortoise Hg. If you got those, then you know that the install has worked correctly. On successful installation of Tortoise Hg, the next step that you really need to do is to restart the computer. I know none of us want to restart the computer once we have installed new software, but in this particular case, it doesn't really work well and you don't get the extra little icon showing up on screen if you don't reboot. So let's go ahead and reboot our system. Once you have rebooted the computer, we can get started. Now I've created an empty folder for the demo, and within this folder I'll start off by creating a new folder and call it as share, and this is going to represent a new network share, something that all of my users would have access to. Next, I'm going to create my users. I'll call them as Bob, and this would represent Bob's working directory. Suppose I want one more user, so I'm going to do the same thing, create a new folder, and this time I would call it as allies. So now I have a Bob as a user, allies as a user, and a network share folder. So to get started with the repository, I'm going to go into the share and I'm going to create a new folder, and this would be a project folder. I'll call it as demo project, and then I'll go inside the demo project and I'm going to create one more folder, and this will be a stable build and call it as stable. This stable build is the actual repository. On right click, go to Tortoise HG and you will see a mint that comes up. Choose create repository here and you get a dialog. I'm going to leave all the default options and I'll click create. We have generated a repository and you can see that from the little green check arrow. So now that I have my repository, I want my users to be able to access it and start building on this project. So I'm going to go into my Bob directory, and I'm going to make the same directory structure, call it as demo project, and into the demo project and create a folder called stable. Now I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Tortoise Hg. Now instead of saying create repository here, there's already a repository that I want to use that app on that network share or the stimulated network share. So I'm going to choose clone to get my own copy of that repository. The clone dialog box will ask me the source path and the destination path. Now the source is where the existing repository is and that you want to work off, and the destination is where it's going. So in this case my destination is correct but my source needs to change. So I'll browse into my share and select stable, since stable is my network share. And then I'll select clone, and now I have my own copy, and now I have my own copy, or rather Bob has his own copy of that project. Now the if you look at the repository and click into that stable build, you see that all that in it is the .hg folder. That's the repository information. So normally you don't do anything with that .hg folder. Congratulations, we have now cloned our repository. We'll go back up, and now we are going to make a copy of the project for allies. I want to show you here that we are not going to follow our normal project hierarchy. So we'll create demo project stable, and then I'll clone that from network share. Click OK. So rather than having the two layer changes, we have just one. Now that we have got the repository set up for our different users, we need to actually create some sort of but before that I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping to make it look better. Before that I want to do a little bit of housekeeping to make it look a little bit nicer when later in the video when we look at how the repository is getting set up and how things are being checked in. I want to give these users names. So we'll go to Tortoise Hg and go to global settings, and we'll call it as share. Okay. And go to allies, Tortoise Hg, global settings, call it as allies. Click OK, and then we'll do the same for Bob. So we have given each of the users their own commit name, so we can see who's checking in what later. So now that housekeeping is done, let me go ahead, create a project. So I'll launch Visual Studio. I'm going to just create a basic web application, name it as Mercurial demo, and then let's select the destination. Click OK. This .NET web application is put under Bob's directory, so the stable build for Bob is ready. We can see that the Visual Studio has created the solution under Bob's working directory. Let's see what this application does. And this is a very basic application that we didn't have to write any code, which is good enough for our purposes. So Bob is done with its project creation. So we'll close Visual Studio. Bob is going to want to keep track of this change. So we'll right click and say HG commit. This will allow us to commit this change to our local repository. This is the place where we can write our comments. We'll write as created project, and we need to select all those files which are to be under version control. So we can select individual files, but a better option would be to check this icon which includes all the files and say commit add. By this way we are adding all the files to the version control. Now at this point the commit is only for Bob's repository. So if we open Alice and check his working directory, she doesn't have any of those files. They haven't been automatically brought over. So if Bob wants to share these changes, he needs to put them up to that share where Alice has access to. So, so what I'm going to do is I'll go to Bob's share folder and push the out push the outgoing change set sync. If we look, Alice still doesn't have the files. So what's going on here is that Alice needs to update her version of the repository. So under allies stable folder, we'll go into Tortoise Hg, synchronize, and we'll pull incoming changes from the shared network repository. Say pull. So our pull command is completed. After every pull, we need to update. Say update. If you don't update, then the local files won't be generated, but only the repository will be updated and not your local file system. If I look, yes, Alice has all the files. We can now open up her version of the solution, and now she wants to make changes to some of the style sheets. In Firefox, so that is it's easy to make out the changes. Alice doesn't like the background color, so let's change the background color to a different color, and the background color is changed. It doesn't like some of the um, tab colors here, so we will find out the current tab color. And if we go to our Visual Studio, find the yeah, we have found a number over here, so we'll replace this with the new color. Save. And let's check up the new changes. The tabs are gray color now. Now Alice is happy with her changes and she wants to check in her changes again to her local repository. We'll close Visual Studio and we'll commit her changes. Say hg commit. So these are the new files which are not yet added to the version controls tree. So we'll check all those files and give a comment saying updated styles. Now all the style changes are updated to the share repository. All the so the new changes are committed to the project. Now, to make things a little bit more interesting, let's assume that while Alice was making these changes for the styles, that Bob was making his own change. So we'll go to Bob's project solution and make some content changes. So we'll just change the text saying welcome to Mercurial and preview those changes. You, you'll all see that we have the old styles. We haven't picked up Ali's changes, yet we have our new content. So now Bob is happy with his changes. We'll close Visual Studio and now we are ready to check in the changes. So we'll do the same thing again under Bob's directory. We'll do the commit hg commit. These are the files which are newly added. We'll give the comment updated content. We'll update his working directory. Now, when tries to Bob tries to push his changes to the share, these are the various options to use the Mercury protocols and push outgoing changes to the share. Click OK. So push is complete. We'll close down and let's see what happens when Alice tries to push her changes to the share. We'll repeat the same. Hg push. This is the error. It means that you're not in sync. So before Alice can push, she need to pull in Bob's chain set. To resolve the error, what we will do is we will pull the changes from the chain set. So we will pull up the changes from the chain set. Tortoise Hg, synchronize, pull incoming changes from the selected URL. So after pull, we have to update. Don't forget to update. Now, if we see the graph here, this is called the version graph. We have we do the pull, we see that there is a branch, these two separate lines of development. So that we want to do is right click and we'll say merge. And this is going to bring our two chain sets together. So the two disconnected networks have been merged. So now we can go to Bob's folder and pull the changes. On pull, we have to update. We can go back to the top level. One thing we have to keep in mind that we haven't done any work actually within the share. What we did initially was we created an empty folder. So if we drill down into the stable release of the share, you can see that is actually the Mercurial files and we don't have the actual project files, and that's because we never did any sort of an update on this particular folder. How? When we did the pull, I told you about that option. How we would always update after every pull, the same thing we can generate those files by just choosing update. On update, what we can see is in the share folder we have all the project files here, and that's a good thing. So now we have reached the end of the video seminar. To make a brief conclusion, we started off with the introduction to the concept of version control. Next, we walked through the steps of installation of Tortoise Hg. Then we took an example scenario using Alice and Bob as our users and Share as our remote repository. Using the protocols such as pull, push, clone, create repository, update, we learned to manage our working directory with the remote repository. I hope the concept of distributed architecture of version control would be much clearer. Thanks for watching.